So we'll So we'll go ahead and get started. So those folks in remote locations, do you have any questions or comments so far? And we went through a lot of concepts, so I want to make sure that our remote locations have. All right.
So they're all on.
Yeah, I think so. No, it's all good.
Nobody's responding.
It really helped. It was confusing to me, kind of, sort of.
That's how you get there.
They're going to call in and say, we can't hear you.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll as folks come in, they'll engage in the conversation. We've talked a lot about a lot of concepts. Are there any questions or comments about kind of how we work with folks so far? Okay, cool. So,
that you shared?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
So the first is human beings can learn, change, and grow. The second is that people do what they think works, even when it doesn't work. The third is that all human behavior is goal-directed. And the fourth is that attitude is a reaction to goals. That attitude is a reaction to goals. And when we talk about this idea of being goal-directed, all human beings' behaviors are directed towards safety, significance, and belonging. So that's what we're trying to get through our behaviors. Even when they are, I would even say they are the goals of misbehavior. That misbehavior is an attempt to try to get access to safety, significance, and belonging. Is that helpful?
Thank you very much. Yeah, perfect.
So let's do this. I want to do another activity with you, if you don't mind. What I'd like for those of you who are in remote locations, I want you to draw a circle as big as you can on your piece of paper. All right? So as big as you can on your piece of paper. For those of us who are here, you have a circle already drawn for you. All right? And let's call this big circle that you're drawing, or the circle that's on your page, the circle of all human knowledge. Okay, anyway, all right. That's a little much, right? Let's call it the circle of the pie of human knowledge. So I want you to think of everything that there is to know, all science, all religion, all language, all history, and I want you to cut yourself a piece of pie the size of what you know of everything there is to know. All right? So cut yourself a piece of pie the size of what you know of everything there is to know. All right? You said you would draw nothing? No, you know something. So at least if you can't necessarily draw a piece of pie, maybe it's a line, maybe it's a dot or whatever. But draw as much as you know of right here at this circle, right here. Yeah. So that circle right there. Right? So you have a very small slice. All right? Cool. Anybody else have a very small slice?
life.
A slice of life, yes, a very small slice. All right, cool. What's in that slice? What are some things that you know for sure? I just need 3 things. What do you know?
Love is in there.
Yeah.
That what? Love. All right, that love is important. 2 more things. Yes. That you're alive. You know you're alive, and yes, you know that peace is important. And what's that?
Honest.
That being honest. Honesty is important. Okay, cool. So those are 3 things that you know for sure. What I want you to do now is I want you to cut a second piece of pie. And this piece of pie is the size of what you are aware of you do not know. So for example, I know that I do not know Mandarin Chinese. I don't know how to speak Chinese. I know that I don't know how to fly an airplane. And now I know that I should not be doing lobotomies. That I shouldn't be cutting off pieces of people's brains. Like, I learned that the hard way. It was, right? So these are things that I know that I don't know. All right? So cut that second piece of pie. I will suggest that it's if you can make that quantifiable, because there is a third piece that we will be addressing. All right? So what are some examples of things that you know you don't know?
Okay, I'm not an astronaut, so I'm not going to.
Right. So you're not an astronaut, so you don't know how to fly in space or do spacewalks. That's fair. That's fair. Something else you know you don't know. What's that? When to die, right? You know you don't know that, right? But nobody gets out of this thing alive, right? So yeah, you don't know that. And what else do you know you don't know? Just one more thing.
When the world's going to end.
So when the world's going to end?
I don't know how to use my smartphone.
You don't know how to use your smartphone. Thank you for being honest about that. That's wonderful, right?
Call us mom.
So this is what I will tell you about the smartphone. They have gotten so smart that you can talk to them and they will do stuff. Yeah, it's interesting. And like my daughter, she talks to the internet at home. And so she'll say, okay, Google, play Pink Ponies from YouTube on the TV in the living room. And all of a sudden the internet goes, okay, and boom, there it is. Right? It's just weird. So yeah, the technology is getting up. Anyway, so you may not necessarily know technology and you don't know when the world's going to end. Right? So there are the things that we know. Yes.
They're not afraid of the phones like we are.
They are not afraid of the phones like we are. Yes. And actually, I think our fear is wise. Anyway, so that's enough editorial. Let me get back to the lesson, right? So there are things that we know. There are things that we know we don't know. And what do you think the rest of that pie is? What you don't know, you don't know. Or I want you to write in the word blind spot. Right? Your blind spot. Your blind spot. It's the stuff you don't know, you don't know. It's your blind spot. Now, the interesting thing about blind spots is that we all have them. We all have them. Anyone ever ridden or driven a car? Does it have blind spots?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, it does. And where are those blind spots?
The sides.
On the sides. Where else? In the back, right? And if you drive one of those big SUVs like a Hummer, the whole thing is a blind spot, right? So we have these blind spots. Now, the interesting thing we have to recognize is that having these blind spots is not what the problem is. It's not a problem having blind spots. What's the problem? Not checking them. Right? Not trying to find out what your blind spots are. Not trying to find your blind spots. And so one of the things we also have to recognize is, and I said this earlier, that my parents did the best they could with what they had to raise me. So if you look at the things I know, the things that I don't know, and my blind spots, all three of those we might call a paradigm. And write this word down next to that circle somewhere or in the circle, paradigm. Paradigm. I used to say paradigm. I was hooked on phonics. It worked for me. You know, right? So paradigm. Yes, Paradigm. Paradigm. And a paradigm is simply the way you see the world. And whose job was it to give you your first paradigm? Give you the first way to see the world? Your parents, your guardians, those people who raised you, right? And where did they get their paradigm? From their parents, from their loved ones, from the people who raised them. And where did they get their paradigm? Same, right? That's right.
Generation after generation.
Right.
Yeah, so generation after generation, the cycle repeats itself. It reflects the generation before it, right? So it keeps doing these things. What's the biggest piece of the pie?
The paradigm.
But look at so the whole thing is the paradigm, but what's the biggest piece?
What I don't know.
What you don't know, your blind spots. So we keep passing these blind spots on and on and on and on.
Blind spot. Yeah, that's right.
The blind spots. And what happens when you get a copy of 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 a copy?
Read it.
It's more blurry.
Right? It gets more blurry. It does not look exactly like the original. Right? It's been changed in all sorts of ways. And so what we have to realize is that we might not be seeing the world as it is, but we are seeing the world as we are. Paradigm, how you see the world. And so if you just see me as a so-called black man, you're missing a lot of who I am. But you also have to recognize that I am black. But not because I did it. I'm not black because I had something to do with it. I was not born black. How you see the world. No, I wasn't. I'm not going through a Michael Jackson thing. I'm not taking pills or anything like that. When I was born in Dayton, Ohio, there were 3 categories for so-called race on the thing: black, white, and other. And so the nurse looked at my parents, and she looked at her list. She looked at me. She looked at her list. She made her decision. And what decision did this nurse make? Black. I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? But here's the thing that's always intrigued me. Before the nurse made a decision, I was already here. I was born human, but America made me black. If I was born on the island, if I was born on on one side of the island, I would have been I would be Haitian. If I was born on the other side of the island, I'd be Dominican. If I was born in Brazil, I would be a different. I would be different, right? If I was born in South Africa, I'd be different because of my mixed race heritage, right? So I'd be different. So when we talk about these optical illusions, we have to recognize that they don't tell the whole story about a human being. And that we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. And so our gender, our age, all of these are filters that change how we see the world. And so we have to recognize that, because I could be seeing the world poorly because I had people who were giving me poor vision. And if I just keep playing these tapes without recognizing the importance of analyzing what my context requires, then I can end up like Mr. Adrian Peterson and missing a year off from work, and I can't afford that. Obviously, he can, right? He could. I can't afford to not work for a year, right? So those are things that are important for us to recognize, that we all have blind spots, and that those blind spots are in different places. And the way we find out about those blind spots is through communicating. We look for them. We ask about those blind spots. What am I missing? And when we do miss something or we make a mistake, what's the problem with falling in the mud?
It's hard to get up.
So it's hard to get up. The biggest problem is not getting up. Right? So when we make mistakes, we come back from those mistakes. We have communications with one another because we will make mistakes. And why will we make mistakes? Because we're human beings. We're human beings, right? So let's move on to the next slide. I'm getting the hang of this. Oh, going backwards. So one of the things that slows us down from being able to actually have good relationships with one another is this idea of the illusion of knowledge. We actually think we know things when sometimes we really don't know them, right? So in your handout, if you open up the full poster, you'll see just to the right at letter B is this statement about the illusion of knowledge. And what I want you to do here in this room, as well as the audience, is I want you to draw a bicycle. I want you to draw a bicycle. Everyone has seen a bicycle, or at least have ridden a bicycle, right? So you should know what a bicycle looks like. So I want you to draw a bicycle at letter B. All right? So I want you to draw a bicycle at letter B. So all you out there, and I want you to draw a bicycle as best you can. All right. I want you to stop right there, and I want you to share your picture of your bicycle with your neighbor or with a couple of neighbors. And I want you to compare your bicycles. So compare your bicycles.
Oh, that's cool. I like it. Oh, yeah.
So out there, Anoka, share your bicycles with your neighbors.
You are so right. Oh, that's okay.
This is worse. Oh, yeah, like this. Yeah, I lost control of my bike.
All right, so we'll go ahead and talk about your bike. So, what did you notice either about your bike or about your neighbor's bike as you were kind of looking at those bikes?
Similar.
They were very similar. Okay. Okay. Oh, you can't draw, and they were similar in the fact that you couldn't draw them. Okay. Cool.
They got wheels.
They had wheels. She said at least they had wheels, right?
Handlebars.
Okay, so they had handlebars. Oh, so some of them had pedals and some didn't, huh? Okay. Cool. What's that? Okay. Oh, they had a mirror on the bike. Okay. So you can see the back. So what is the what is being suggested by the fact that we're drawing these bikes? I would submit to you that if I were to take some of those drawings and actually make a bike, that some of those drawings probably would not allow me to actually ride the bike. Right? Or it depends on how you want to ride the bike, right? So what does that suggest? What that suggests to me is going back to that idea of diversity, having that language, that we use a word, but the picture that we have for the word is so different that we actually can't have a conversation, right? And so what I suggest is that we have to recognize that as human beings, that there are assumptions that I might be making that could be false or erroneous thoughts, either about a person, a group, or a behavior. And that the only way that I really know to do that is to really check my assumptions. And so I walk in seeing this woman with a hijab on, and I've been told about what those people are like. But I have to check those assumptions until I get an opportunity to actually build a relationship with this person and find out for myself, right? I know what those people who live in Frogtown are like. I know what those people are like. It might be to my advantage to hold off those assumptions until I actually am able to interact with folks to find out both for myself. Someone asked me a question the other day because I have friends that believe that the earth is still flat. And I have friends who believe that the earth is hollow, right? So I have so they haven't, I don't know how it can be flat and hollow, but people, whatever. And so one guy asked me this question. He said, well, what happens when you put a drop of water in a vacuum? He said, what happens? Guess what I told him? I don't know. Because I've never put a drop of water in a vacuum. I don't know, right? And so a lot of times we have to ask ourselves, how do we know what we know? And we have to pay attention to what we've been taught as it relates to our context. Because as context changes, so should we. So should our behavior. So should the way we think. So should the way we act, right? So I don't know if this is true for many of you, but I have heard this, that there used to be a time when Brazil nuts were called by another name. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Right? So for some of you, I don't know if you know what a Brazil nut is, but it is it's like a orange wedge, but it's mahogany, hard wood shell. Really rough. And, in my house, we usually have those and walnuts and pecans right around Christmas time. That and oranges and stuff. So that's like Christmas for me. Yeah. But they were called, so my family called them Brazil nuts. And I found out that other families called them other things. Right? And so, and so if you don't mind, I'll just say it because some people still looking at me kind of puzzled, but for some families, they refer to them as nigger toes, right? Or nigger heels, right? What we recognize is that was something that was called that in the past in that context. And I would imagine that the people who use those in the popular culture probably did not invent that word or that phraseology for that thing, but they just used it because that's what was being used. Okay. And it's been told to me that some people didn't even know it had another name, that's the only name that they knew it by. And so in our current context, we have to recognize that things are different. And so we have to call them by a different name. And so So that's important for us to realize that context is extremely important, and that what we think we know, we have to challenge that sometimes. Or when faced with the challenge, we have to actually entertain that and be a critical thinker in everything that we do. So some of the illusions of knowledge are simply facts and truth. And what I would suggest to you is that facts and truth are not related. Facts and truth are not related. We like for them to be related, but oftentimes they are not related. So looking at the facts of my life, I should not be sitting here at this table having a conversation with you. The statistics say that I should be doing something else, but I'm not, because that's not my truth, right? Pluto used to be a planet. The truth is that it's no longer a planet. Why? Because the facts changed and the truth changed. So sometimes those things are not related. The other illusion of knowledge is this idea of the imposter syndrome. So sometimes we're really good at doing something, or we're not sure if we're good at doing it, and we undervalue our ability to serve or ability to give, when we are adequate and we are enough, right? We are enough. We are adequate. Young people that we're working with don't need any more than us. We're enough to be able to help them. The stories that we have, the challenges that we face, the things that we've overcome, that is enough to inspire someone to do better, right? So the imposter syndrome makes us think that we shouldn't be doing anything. This idea of cognitive dissonance. So sometimes we'll see that the world outside of us is, one way, and the thing that's going on in our head is something different. And that space between those two things is what we call cognitive dissonance. And it is that space where we can think and make decisions. So if you're constantly thinking, you're constantly challenging yourself to look at new puzzles and to solve new problems, you're in that space where you can actually continue the development of your brain and be a cognitive thinker. You can be in charge of your thoughts. Next is attitudes, habits, and beliefs. Sometimes we believe that we're stuck in who we are. I am just who I am. You can be like that. But we know what happens when things don't adjust to the atmosphere, when the atmosphere changes, when the culture changes, when the environment changes. If you don't change, what happens? You become a dinosaur. And how are the dinosaurs doing right now? Not so great, right? Not so great. And then there's conformity to just doing things just because things have been done that way. And those are some of the ways in which this illusion of knowledge gets established. So I'm going to put up a picture up here, and I want you to tell me which direction this bus is going. So for those of you here in the room, is it going to the right or to the left? It's not going anywhere? Okay. So if it were to start moving, which direction would be the direction it would move? Okay. So here's the interesting thing about this particular picture. This kids who are between the ages of 5 and 8 years old get this question right every time.
5 to 8 years old.
5 to 8 years old. They get it right every time.
Wow.
So if this bus was operational, which way would it be going? And it would be going to the left. Why?
The front is lower than
Okay. Okay. Because the door is on the other side. So why would an 8-year-old, why would a 5 or an 8-year-old get this right every time? Because they ride the bus all the time, right? So as adults, we add extra things to this picture and say, well, it's not a functioning bus because there's no tail lights. It's not a functioning bus because there's not headlights. I can't see where the front is. I can't blah, 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 blah. But when a child sees that with their eyesight, with their mindset, and says, this is a functioning bus, and the door is simply on the other side. Right? And so sometimes we overanalyze and we overthink things, which helps to create this idea of the illusion of knowledge. All right? So, just something to think about. So we're going to talk a little bit about commonalities and differences. So, good. So on your handout at letter D, in your handout, and for those of you who are remote, you can just see this up on the screen. There are 9 shapes. So tell me about these 9 shapes. What do you notice about these 9 shapes?
Circle, square, rectangle.
So there's a circle, a square, and a rectangle. A triangle, square, and a circle. All right.
The groups are similar, but they're all different.
The groups are similar, but they're all different. So explain that. What do you mean?
Well, the triangle at the bottom is just straight, and in the middle, the coloring is a different color, and it's going up and down. The child colored up and down, and the bottom one they're coloring side to side.
All right.
But the shapes themselves
But the shape-
all themselves. It's what's inside.
It is what's inside that is different, but the shapes themselves are shapes, right? They are the same and they are different, right? They are in fact the same and they are in fact different at the same time. And so when we talk about, trying to relate to someone else, we have to recognize that there are ways in which we are very much the same and very much different. And part of that is driven by this this idea of the context that we've grown up in, right? So we'll spend some time talking about culture. And actually in this, wonderful. So we'll spend some time talking about these commonalities and differences. So one of the things we have to recognize is that culture plays a huge part in looking at our commonalities and differences. And we also have to recognize that, well, let me take a step back just for a second. What is the most valuable, non-renewable resource on the planet? What is the most valuable, non-renewable resource on the planet? Oil, natural gas. H2O, water. What else? What do you think? Solar energy, air. Okay. I asked this question one time, and a woman said, "Your teeth," and I was like, "You're right, because you only get one. You get one set, and once those things are gone, there's a whole nother right." So. But I would say that the things that you mentioned are fair and they're good things. But I want to say this thing is even more precious than all of those things. And I would suggest that the most valuable non-renewable resource on the planet is your soul. It's you. There will never be another you. And in my case, the world is glad. It couldn't take 2 of us. That would be too much. Right? Yeah, there will never be another you. And so what we have to recognize is that every person that we encounter is precious. Is precious. Finland does something that's very unique. The country of Finland does something that is very unique. When a Finnish baby is born, the government sends a letter to the parents saying thank you for having a Finnish child. They send them a box, a 30-day box, and the box is as big as a crib, with diapers and formula and everything the parents need for the first 30 days of the child's life. What do you think the Finnish people think about the Finnish government? They love the government. Love it. Right? Why? Because the government loves them back. I don't want to talk about what we do when people have children or what we don't do when people have children. I do know there's a lot of blame and shame if you have too many, if you're not on a certain level. Yes, ma'am.
I know that to happen one time, and that was my niece. She had triplets in Kankakee, Illinois, and she got what you are talking about, I think, from the federal government.
So the government she had triplets, and so that's the only one you knew.
Yeah, they got that.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So I think that's interesting, right? So we have to recognize that every human soul that we interact with is valuable and precious. And even if they don't realize that they're valuable and precious, we have to see it in them. I will tell you, I did not see how smart and brilliant and beautiful I was until other people told me and showed me how beautiful and intelligent I was.
All right.
They showed me. I didn't know. And so we have to keep telling folks. We have to show them, right? So there's two parts of the human soul that I think are very important. It's the body and the spirit. And when the body and spirit are connected, we have someone who is ready to build authentic human relations. What we know is that free market capitalism is assaulting, particularly our young people, our middle-aged people, our old people. It's attacking all of us, saying, and what's the mantra of TV commercials? What's the mantra? What's the thing that keeps getting repeated in most TV commercials? Buy, but for what reason? You need it because you're broken without our stuff. You are broken without our stuff. And that's not the truth. The truth is, I don't need your stuff. What I need to do is find me. I need to recognize who I am. Right? So that's important. So we'll go back to the slide. So there's a couple of things that we have to recognize that our human commonalities and differences are important to engage. We also have to understand what culture is. And that culture is a two-part kind of process. It has two things going on at the same time. So I've used so when I was growing up and when I was being educated, they used this iceberg metaphor or iceberg theory of culture. And basically what they said was that there's just a little bit above the iceberg that you can see, but there's a whole lot more under the iceberg that you can't see. And that's how they talked about culture. I believe that human beings are a bit more organic than icebergs, right? So I created this carrot of culture metaphor, if you will. Right? This word picture. And has anyone ever planted carrots before or grown them? Okay, cool. So there are basically two parts to a carrot. There's the part that's under the ground, and there's the part that's above the ground. And what do we call the part that's underground? What is that called? The root, right? And depending on where you come from in the United States, it could be the root. That's what my grandmother called it. She said it's a root. Right? So it can be the root or the root. And then what's the part that's above ground called? The stalk. Okay? So the greens are the stalk. So you have the root of the carrot and you have the stalk of the carrot. Now, there's a relationship between those two. So what does the stalk do for the root? What is the stalk, the green part? What does that do for the root of the carrot? It feeds it, right? So it takes in the sunlight, it turns it into energy, and it feeds that down into the root. And what does the root do for the stalk?
carry minerals.
It carries minerals and water up to the star. So they need each other. They have a symbiotic relationship, right? So they need each other. They help each other out. So when we talk about culture, I want us to think about that. I want you to think about culture in that way. That culture has two parts. The part you can see and the part that you can't see. And the part that you can see, we will call those things artifacts. Right? So artifacts. So when scientists go back and try to look at an ancient culture, they find these artifacts. So what are some examples of artifacts that when scientists go and discover these new places, what are some artifacts that they find?
Dinosaurs.
So in some cases, bones, tools. What else?
A lot of impressions.
A lot of impressions, right? So images either on cave walls or on tablets.
Different cultures.
Different cultures. They'll find bowls or plates, right? They find artwork. They find all of these things that you can see about a culture. So what are some things that when we engage with a culture that may be different from us, things that we may notice about that culture that might be different?
Dress.
The way people clothe themselves, the dress, the attire that they wear may be different. What else? Language. The language that they speak or even how they use a similar language may be different. What else?
Similarities.
So similarities. Yep. What? The food that they eat, right? The food that they eat could be different, or even if it's the same food, the way it's seasoned could be different, given where people are coming from, right? So these are all things we can see, artifacts. But then there is the things that we can't see that we call values. So the root of culture is its values. And so what are some of the values of culture? I think you wrote down some of those values when you did the 5 circles, right? So family, faith, community, love. I'm trying to go back to some of the things that were written down. Peace, tolerance, acceptance, pets, freedom. These are all values that are at the root of culture. So when looking for a carrot, can I see the carrot in the ground? I cannot see the carrot in the ground.
See the top.
But I can see the top of the carrot. And if I see the top of the carrot, that should be an indicator to me that what? There's a carrot under there, right? There's a carrot under there.
Right.
So no longer when we see something we don't understand, will we just say, that's just what they do or that's just how people are. We now have to understand that when I see an artifact, I'm seeing a physical manifestation of a value. That the artifacts will lead me to the carrot. That the artifacts will lead me to the value of that culture. So even if I don't understand the culture itself, I have to recognize that those artifacts mean something to those people. And so if I want to be helpful, then what do I need to find out? What is the meaning behind that artifact? Right? So here's one I like to pick on all the time. I like to pick on this because and I apologize for this because my generation started it. We thought it was cool. We didn't know it would get so rampant. We didn't know it would go so far, right? Sagging pants. Has anyone seen that phenomenon? Yes. She said, I hated too much. Right. I apologize. My generation started it. We thought it was cool. We thought sagging pants were cool. Now, something I think is interesting about the sagging pants, because there was something else that happened at the same time, around the same time that this was happening. So sagging pants were happening, and then there was this other thing, particularly in urban areas, where kids were wearing their clothes backwards. They were wearing their clothes backwards because there was a group called Crisscross, and they wanted you to wear your clothes backwards. Now, the interesting thing about this is that people stopped wearing the clothes. Now, there was people who